All right, so today we're talking about how to burn fat faster. We need some fat, but too much body fat has some negative consequences on our health and makes exercise can be harder. And there's lots of misconceptions about body fat and how to lose it. So we're going to try to understand it better and maybe get rid of some of the myths, or at least explain some of the myths away. So, as you probably know, I'm Shayla Roberts. I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist, and I have some qualifications, as you can see there. I've done this. I have to change that slide. It's way more than 25 years now, but maybe I'll just leave it as 25 years. I just want to say a brief comment about these workshops. So first, they're not a personal training program. This is general advice based on the evidence, and everybody's nutrition and dietary needs should be considered in their own context, and your own health and fitness and what your goals are. That being said, if you've been to any kind of presentation before, there's probably, stay to the end and you get this special offer, or so there are no sales pitches here. This is not the idea behind these. If you want a personalized program, I can certainly help you, but this is not the point. The point is to give you some facts and explain some of the misconceptions, because there's lots about health and fitness and it makes me crazy. So this is my way of combating some of those myths. And so my goal is for you to help you understand the bigger picture, not the hype or follow it the latest, best, newest fad trend. Some of you are my clients, so I hope that this helps you understand some of the rationale behind your programs. It might help you ask the right questions, or maybe change your long-term strategy based on what you learn. But as always, I believe in science, and I would never prescribe something that I would not do myself and doesn't have the evidence behind it. So as we start, what are we doing today? We are very efficient fuel storage systems, which is good because that helps us stay warm. It insulates our organs. It helps store calories in case of an emergency. But our modern lifestyles have definitely caused an imbalance in the using and the storing of fat, which has some health consequences. So today we're going to talk about how to be an inefficient fat storage system. Our obsession with weight loss has some unexpected consequences. Really, we want to think about body composition as opposed to weight loss. And if you were at my muscle mass workshop, you'll know that I'm really keen on people keeping their muscle, and you can lose fat, but we don't want to lose weight, because often losing weight is muscle loss, which is unhealthy. And then when we gain weight after a diet, we often just gain fat as opposed to muscle. And fat is not inert, and losing muscle has long-term health and performance consequences, but there really is a way to maximize body composition by losing more fat and retaining or building muscle for long-term health and for performance gain. So you might think, well, I'm not an athlete, but performance could just be having more fun regardless of what you're doing, whether it's hiking or skiing or anything that requires you to be active. So we're going to talk about sort of what is fat and what it does, how to measure it. That's going to be very short because we talked about that last time. And excuse me. And we're going to talk about how sleep affects fat loss, exercise and inactivity, and of course, food, because that is a huge component of fat loss. So some facts about fat. Fat makes food taste good, as Homer knows. It keeps us feeling full and satisfied. Fat is part of our cell membranes, all cell membranes, which is why having too much body fat interferes with our ability to use insulin effectively. Insulin is a gatekeeper. It allows blood sugar to be absorbed into our cells for fuel, and too much fat gums up the lock. So we can't get the insulin is the key. We can't open the cell to use blood sugars as fuel. So I don't know if you can hear that, but my dog is talking to me right now, which is funny because he's a little bit chubby. He's had his dinner, otherwise he would be crazy. And domesticated animals and humans really are the only species that gain fat. Most wild animals don't overeat. So we need some fat, but we want to make it healthy fat, and we want to make sure that while we're incorporating good fats into our diet, we're not eating too much so that we're storing fat. Sorry. So what does fat do? It stores fat in 3 ways, and we're going to focus on the last 2, but I'm just going to talk about all 3. You're going to have to leave. Sorry about that. And it's a very broad word. Adipose tissue or fat in the body. It's all of these types of fat, but essential fat is what we need. It's exactly that. It's essential to your life and a healthy body. It's found in your brain. You need to have fat in your brain, in your bone marrow, in your nerves, and your membranes that protect your organs. And essential fat plays a major role in hormone regulation, hormones that control fertility, vitamin absorption, and temperature regulation. Depending on who you look at, essential fat would be part of your body composition that you require. Probably women need up to 13% to come from essential fat, and men at least 2 to 5% of their body weight is essential fat. Visceral fat, everybody knows, is the fat around our abdomen. It's referred to as belly fat, and it's white fat that's stored in your abdomen and around your major organs. So it is it's active, and it definitely affects your liver, your kidneys, pancreas, intestines, and your heart. So it's the type we're trying to limit. And then subcutaneous is the stuff you can pinch, just fat stored under your skin. Majority of our body is subcutaneous fat, and we can measure it quite easily. There's a common assumption that a high fat diet is what causes people to have too much body fat, which is partially true, but too many calories cause us to store body fat, and those calories can be too many carbohydrates or protein. Some of those are harder to convert into fat than others. Refined and processed foods, if you think of these foods as mechanically digested, so they've already been chewed up by some process, they're really easy to store as fat because they're very low in fiber and can cause weight gain very easily. So people with diets that are high in refined sugar and processed foods are more prone to have visceral fat, which is more dangerous. So we know that there's 3 types of fat, and we're trying to get rid of visceral fat, which luckily is fairly active and easier to get rid of, and maybe subcutaneous fat, but we need essential fat. So this is white fat cells, and there's 3 types of fat cells. White fat is what you would think of. It's the stored fat under your skin. It plays a really large role in the function of estrogen and leptin, which is the hormone that stimulates hunger, insulin, cortisol, which is our stress hormone, and growth hormone. And we need some, but we don't need a lot. Too high a body fat percentage obviously puts you at risk for some diseases like type 2 diabetes or coronary artery disease, high blood pressure, stroke, kidney and liver disease, and some types of cancer. We have brown fat, but not very much. That's usually the type that babies have. And then there's a combo beige or bright fat. And they are similar to brown fat, they burn fat rather than store it. we don't know very much about this type of fat. So I'm not going to say anything that's not true. And we do know that body composition is important, and you'll function better with a good body composition. A healthy range helps with temperature regulation, balances hormone levels. It helps us store vitamins. It's better for our neurological function, and it helps us balance blood sugar. But most people are worried about having too much, which can be harmful for our health in terms of heart disease and stroke, type 2 diabetes, metabolic disease. So it's not really what you weigh. As you can see, if you have 5 pounds of fat versus 5 pounds of muscle, the muscle takes up much less space. So someone weighing the same that has more muscle is going to be smaller. So it's not really about what you weigh, it's about what you're made of. And when we gain more fat in our muscle cells, so when we start to, the fat starts to spill over out of our fat cells and into our muscle, you get this nice marbling look. It's the disruption in muscle tissue. So this increases inflammation and leads to long-term muscle dysfunction. So I don't know if that is probably steak, but that's what we would look like when you gain too much fat and you start to have intramuscular fat. So you become an efficient fat storer with inactivity and the wrong type of food. Now, sometimes people feel as they age that they might gain weight by breathing. And as people gain weight, they store more fat and that fat starts to overflow. But aging may change where you store fat. And if you're losing muscle, it feels like you're just gaining weight. But it's not the cause, thankfully. It's the cause of changing where you store fat, but it is not the cause of storing fat. So when dietary fat overflows, it increases your visceral fat, so your belly fat. It increases metabolic disturbances, which is the main thing that we're concerned about. So the type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, fatty liver disease, kidney problems, and insulin disturbances. So you can't get blood sugar from your you can't get sugar from your blood and into the cells where they need the fuel. So how much fat do we have? We know that there's a number of ways to measure fat and body composition. The gold standard used to be underwater weighing, but it's a DEXA scan. Bioelectrical impedance, those handles, they're not very accurate. Body fat calipers can be very accurate, but you need someone to do it. And you need someone who's experienced in doing it. So there are a number of ways to do it, but if you watch my video on how to measure your own body fat, if you know what your circumference size is, you can keep track of losing body fat, because if you're staying the same weight and your circumferences are shrinking, you are losing body fat. The biggest thing to remember right now while we're physically distancing is to just measure your waist circumference. And women, if you have a waist circumference of more than 35 inches, or men more than 40 inches, that's considered a risk of disease because that's too much visceral fat. So that's the easiest thing to measure right now. You just need a flexible tape measure and just measure your waist circumference, because even though you might store fat on your hips and thighs, there is no health risk to that. So now we're going to talk about the factors that affect fat loss or fat gain, and sleep is critical. You cannot lose body fat if you are not getting enough sleep. Being short on sleep really can affect your weight. While you weren't sleeping, your body cooked up like the perfect recipe for weight gain. Isn't that fun? So when you're short on sleep, it's easy to maybe drink a large latte to get going, or maybe tempted to skip exercise because you're too tired, or get takeout for dinner and then turn in late because you don't feel very good, and then it just starts that cycle over again. So if this series of events happens too many times, and you don't get enough sleep on a regular basis, then you start to affect some decision making in your brain. It dulls the activity in your frontal lobe. So this is where, right here, where we make decisions and where impulse control comes in. And not having enough sleep is like being a little bit drunk. You don't have the mental clarity to make the right decisions. Plus, you're overtired, so your brain's reward systems rev up and look for something that feels good. So when you're well rested, maybe those temptation foods are easily avoided. But if you're sleepy, comfort food cravings, your sleep deprived brain is like, yeah, let's eat cake. A research study by the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that when people were starved of sleep, late night snacking increased, and they were more likely to snack on high carb snacks, so chips, potatoes, bread, all those delicious things. And they chose snacks with twice as much fat when you're sleep deprived than when you sleep for 7 to 8 hours. Sleeping too little also causes us to eat bigger portions of all types of food. So lack of sleep really does increase our craving for energy dense, carbohydrate rich, processed foods. And add it all together, and that sleepy brain appears to love junk food and is unable to say no to any kind of temptation. We have no impulse control. So that's not a good combination. Sleep also, if you're trying to lose weight and you get a lack of sleep, so researchers took 2 groups, and one group of the weight loss group got 5.5 hours of sleep, and one group got 8.5 hours of sleep. So they both lost the same amount of weight, but the people who slept 5.5 hours lost 70% of their weight from muscle. That is bad news. So short sleep increases our hunger, increases our appetite, compromises our impulses, increases our consumption of high calorie foods, and then causes us to lose muscle. So I cannot tell you how important sleep is if you want to burn fat better. So let's look at what happens when we get less than 7 hours of sleep. So too little sleep stimulates cortisol, our stress hormone, and this signals our body to store fat to conserve energy, which is what we're trying to not do. When people cut back on sleep over 2 weeks, they definitely store more fat. So even if you're losing weight, like I said before, you're still storing fat. And then, more stress hormones increases our cravings. We eat more fat and sugar. We are more hungry, and the cycle just goes around and around and around. So having a proper sleep cycle schedule and sleeping 7 to 8 magic hours a night is going to make you a better fat burner. Not sleeping is a great way to store fat. So what about exercise? Because everybody says, oh, but I haven't exercised, so I'm not losing weight. So exercise is a relatively recent adaptation to our modern lifestyles. We didn't actually exercise that long ago. We engineered activity out of our day, and now we have to put it back in with exercise, but we also need to limit times of inactivity. So that doesn't mean you can never sit down and enjoy yourself, but if you're sitting for long periods of time, you're going to store more fat because you're not metabolically active, and that makes it harder to lose weight. So we do need to exercise, and I'm going to talk specifically about exercise and specifically about nutrition, but you also need to make sure that you are not inactive for hours at a time. So when you go on the internet, people on the internet often talk about eating more fat. So you train your body to burn more fat. And that's not how it works. So using fat, we use fat all the time. We're all burning fat right now. Because we're not really being very active, and fat is a slow process. So as we increase our exercise intensity, we lose the ability to burn fat. And at really high intensities, then we use no fat at all because it's a slow process. It's a slow process, and eating fat is not going to speed it up. However, you can do it more efficiently with training. So once your fat is in your muscle, it is either stored there for later or it's used as fuel by your mitochondria. So you think of your mitochondria as the fuel cells in your muscle, and every cell in your body except red blood cells have mitochondria. And fat breakdown only occurs in the mitochondria. If you want to burn more fat, you want to have more mitochondria. You don't need to eat more fat. You need to make more mitochondria. So mitochondria are the fat burning furnaces. And when we do aerobic exercise, we can make them 35% bigger, and we can increase the size up to, we can make 35% more mitochondria in our muscle cells with aerobic exercise, and we can make those mitochondria between 15 and 50% bigger. So exercise increases our mitochondrial density somewhere between 400 to 2,000 per cell. So the fitter you are, the more mitochondria you have. So that is really, really critical. You can train. So there's one other thing about burning more fat. If you train, you will increase the ability to burn more fat. So lots of times you hear people talking about, I'm going to be burning more fat. This is a very popular topic with keto diets right now, but it's not what you're eating. Training, after 12 weeks of training, 40 minutes, 3 times a week, you increase your triglyceride use, so fat in your cell, from 20 to 40% of your fuel source. And that's because you have more mitochondria. Your carbohydrates will go down. So when you're unfit, probably 70% of your fuel comes from stored carbohydrates. As you get fitter, you can drop that down to 40%. So training is the key. So this didn't turn out. Sorry, there's 2 pictures on this slide, and I can only see one. This is just really short, like what happens when you start exercising. The first 10 seconds, you have stored ATP, and you don't have very much of it, and you use it up really fast, but this will, get you to jump out of your chair and turn off the stove or something like that. You're like 10 seconds. If you're an Olympic athlete, 100 meters, you're done. It's all stored fuel. As you go longer, you start to use glucose. And then as you go more than 10 minutes to 2 hours, you start eating fatty acids and glucose. But the immediately short bursts of quick energy require quick fuel. And why this is important is because we need to replace that fuel. So even though you don't burn any fat in those short bursts of energy, you need to replace it, and you can replace it with fat. So training status means that you will be able to replace that fuel, and it takes about 24 to 48 hours to replace all that fuel. So this, you might have gone for a walk with someone who's maybe overweight and not very fit, and they're exhausted after 15 minutes, and they think, I feel dizzy, I have to sit down, I don't feel very good, or I have to have a snack. And you're thinking, you have all this stored fuel. Like, how can you only go this far? They've run out of carbohydrates. You cannot burn fat with carbohydrates. They do have stored fuel, but they can't access it. So the more you train, the better you are able to access stored fuel. The funny part is that when we're burning fat, it's decreased after ingestion of a high-fat diet. So partly because we don't have that glycogen or those stored carbohydrates, and partly because of adaptations in the muscle cells. So high-fat diets really do work against our best interests in terms of fueling our performance, but also burning fat as fuel. So to burn fat as fuel, it's based on lots of things. What we eat is one of them, how trained we are, the intensity of our exercise, the duration of our exercise. And so the exercise prescription and dietary recommendations, when you're training someone, need to take into account their goals, obviously, the duration, the sport specific goals, and to elicit the kind of training effect that you want. So what is the best exercise? Do you need to do long, slow endurance training? Do you need to do high intensity training? Should you do resistance training? Really, the best training is the one that you'll do, but a little bit of all of the above would be ideal. And these are some sample types of workouts that will burn fat. So I don't expect you, I mean, I'm sure there's some in there you recognize right away, like probably everybody knows what HIIT is, so high intensity interval training. Everybody knows what resistance training is, it's strength training. Circuit training, you do strength training continuously. There's lots and lots of types of training. So the reason that I put this in is there is no, it's like a superfood. There is no perfect workout. What you do will depend on your history, the training status you're at now, the type of training you can do, because we're all limited to what we can do right now, how long you want to train, the equipment you have, how fit you are, your personal health history, if you have any injuries, goals. The point is that, like food, some exercise are better for you and your goals, and some are not. So there's a lot of noise around HIIT being like the perfect workout. It's a really great workout, but it's one of many. So these ladies are obviously super fit, and they're also very lean. And so this is called adaptive thermogenesis. So the fitter you are, the less calories you burn to do the same workout. So this is where I see people making lots of mistakes when they start training, any kind of training. It's hard, it's inefficient because you're not very good at it. So being inefficient is a great way to burn calories. But the better you get at something, the less it takes, the less energy it takes to do the same workout. So you would need to do a different workout or increase the intensity or eat less if you want the same fat burning results. Another thing that people do when they train is they start out with good intentions to maintain the intensity. And that's one of the problems with high intensity interval training. It's hard and you need to keep it hard. And that's hard to do. It's hard to push yourself hard enough. It's easy to get distracted, especially because we're all working out at home right now, and check something or stop in the middle, which is one of the reasons I prefer going to the gym, because you just go and do your exercises and you leave. So you want to make sure that you're not working against your own best interests. And then when it comes to diet and exercise, one of the real problems, especially with events like track and field or gymnastics or something that is kind of weight-based, you want to have the power to weight ratio, is that when you lose muscle and you're training, muscle loss is associated with chronic injuries, even in trained athletes. So eating disorders or calorie restriction results in muscle loss, and that is an increased injury and bone loss risk. So regardless of your current fitness level, it is healthier to lose fat mass and maintain your muscle, even if you don't notice a change immediately. So body composition means much more than what you weigh. So now we're going to talk about food. And I'm going to talk about food by itself and food with exercise, because there's two kind of opposing things that you can look at. So one, I'm going to talk about a pretty new study that was really interesting and really exciting. So they wanted to know, can we increase insulin sensitivity and improve fat metabolism with diet alone? So with this study, the people, all the participants, no one exercised. So this is simply diet. And the other exciting thing about this was they took people, not the typical study participants, so 50 to 60-year-old overweight men and women. So they weren't particularly young, they were not fit, they did not exercise. And all they wanted to know is, can we change how much body fat people have with their diet? And the short answer is yes, that's very exciting. And they were divided into an intervention group who did not change. And then they had another group who did change. So keep in mind that this was an American study. So the stats are fairly similar, but maybe not quite exactly the same. So what they wanted to do is figure out how they could manage people's body fat. And they did some interesting adaptations and some tests, but they did not reduce their carbohydrate intake. Some of these people were diabetic or pre-diabetic, and you might think, well, then you should eat less carbohydrates. But reducing carbohydrates manages the symptoms of diabetes, not the cause. They also looked at their fatty liver disease, since 30 to 40% of North Americans have fatty liver disease, which is directly related to having too much visceral fat. So they put them on a high carbohydrate diet. When I say high, I mean it was really high. And diet is key, especially for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So the plant-based diets not only help you feel full because they fill up your stomach and they cause the stretch receptors to fire, but the fiber has a thermic effect of food. So what they did in this study is people had, now I just have to get I want to make sure this is exact because it is really high. 70% of their diet was carbohydrates, so complex carbohydrates. So fruits, vegetables, legumes, and grains. The other people obviously didn't change their calories, but they made sure that these people ate a lot of fiber. So the typical American would get about 20 grams of fiber in their day. And this study, that people were eating 30 to 35 grams of fiber, which is a lot. And they also limited the fat in their diet. So the fat was limited to 20 to 30 grams a day. So if you were reading a label, it would have to be 2 grams or less on the package of but most of these foods did not have a label. 20 to 30 grams a day is hard to do. 30 to 35 grams of fiber is pretty easy to do because they were just eating whole foods. So what was the difference after this? Well, they lost 15 pounds. And they increased their insulin sensitivity and their metabolism by diet alone. So they burned more calories sitting still simply by eating more fiber and less fat. So they tested their thermic effect of food, so how much calories they were burning right after, and they tested how many calories they burned in it's a device you wear or you sit in a room. Because when you burn calories, this is where does fat go when you burn calories? You exhale it. So you measure people's exhaled carbon dioxide, and voila, that's your fat burning. So next time you're running up a hill and breathing really hard, you can just congratulate yourself and saying, there goes my fat. This is good. So with this high fiber diet and no exercise, they increased their thermic effect of food, so the inefficiency of their food to be stored, by 14%. So what does that mean? It means that in a week, they burned an extra 300 calories a week just by eating fiber. In a year, they burned just over 15,000 calories in a year just by eating fiber. These people did no exercise whatsoever, and they lost, and it was a 16-week study, they lost 34% of their liver fat, and they only lost 10% of their muscle, as opposed to a high-fat diet, which you would lose 50% of your muscle. So that is really exciting that you can change your body composition and your health without exercise. I'm not saying don't exercise. We know it's good for us and it does all sorts of things. But if you can limit your fat calories to 20 to 30 grams a day, you can eat 70% of your diet from carbohydrates. You're going to be full because that's a ton of fiber, and you're going to burn more calories. In fact, they took a study where they switched people just from eating white bread sandwiches to whole wheat sandwiches, and they had a post-meal calorie burn. So that's one of the reasons that plant-based diets are so effective, is because fiber is an inefficient fuel source, and you have to eat it, or you have to burn calories to digest it. So you feel full because it fills up your stomach, and then it burns more calories. So that's pretty exciting. So if you're thinking about, what should I eat for workouts and what should I eat after workouts? So try to eat as much fiber as you can. Like 30 to 35 grams of fiber is quite a bit, but it's not hard on a plant-based diet if you're eating unprocessed food. And eating more, even fiber in fruit will reduce your cardiovascular disease risk and your diabetes. People are afraid to eat fruit. There's no reason to be afraid of fruit. Added sugars, we're not so fussy about. So, but what about if I exercise? Because this study was just about a diet. I would sort of go along the lines of the 55% carbohydrates, 25% protein, 20% fat, which is about what this study was in terms of the fat content. They had a bit higher carbohydrate content. And then if you're doing long endurance exercise, you fuel those long workouts with carbohydrates. But in terms of your main meals, you want to make sure that it's about this breakdown. I wouldn't get too hung up on macronutrients, because if you're eating whole, unprocessed plant foods, you're going to be okay. If you're doing early morning workouts, and this is something that people often do hungry, they do it in a fasted state, but you will burn less calories for the rest of the day if you exercise in a fasted state. So you may burn more calories, but for the rest of the day, you're limiting your calorie burn. So having a little pre-workout fuel makes a big difference. And it doesn't have to be very much, but it should be some carbohydrate and protein, and you will burn more fat calories for the rest of the day. So I'm just going to wrap up really quick here because I don't want to take up all your evening. But what about other things like alcohol or caffeine or sugar? Alcohol is high in sugar. It's almost the same calorie content as fat. And if your aim is weight management, it seems paradoxical, to say the least, that consuming empty calories in a liquid form is going to help you. It also slows the amount of calories you're able to burn during exercise, because we can't store alcohol. So your body tries to get rid of it as quickly as possible. And this gets in the way of burning fat and other nutrients and absorbing other nutrients. You can't gain as much muscle if you drink alcohol. Alcohol disrupts sleep patterns, and we know how important sleep is for maintaining our muscle and getting rid of fat. It's vital for muscle growth. It can reduce testosterone, so that's a hormone you need to build muscle. And drinking alcohol also poisons your muscle fibers, so means they don't adapt like they normally would. And this can last for up to 3 days after drinking. Drinking can interfere with our heart rhythm, and sports performance is impaired, especially if you drink after an injury. It slows the recovery process down. So I can't say anything good about alcohol. If you choose to drink it, that's your choice, but it's not for your health, and it's certainly not to lose fat or to build muscle. Caffeine, on the other hand, exciting news, is associated with weight loss. It does increase the thermic effect of food, so it turns our furnace on, and it does increase our ability to oxidize fat. And especially in women, yay, something good for us. And especially if you're a low caffeine drinker and then you add caffeine, you do kind of you kind of get used to it if you're drinking it regularly. And then sugar, you know, I don't want to take all the joy out of everybody's life. It really is efficiently stored as fat because it's, you know, there's no fiber or anything like that, but it tastes good. So 6 teaspoons a day for women, and 9 teaspoons for 6 teaspoons for women and 9 teaspoons for men seems to be okay. And I would encourage you to eat real sugar, not sugar substitutes. If you're going to have sugar, sugar substitutes have a kind of weird effect on our blood sugar. It makes us harder to have feelings of fullness. They mess with our gut bacteria, which we know is really important for our health. So you want to limit your treats. Don't have them every day, but I certainly wouldn't just toss them all away because they're yummy. So a calorie budget, you know, our bodies and brains prefer carbohydrates as a fuel source. So make sure you eat unprocessed carbohydrates. The timing of protein can be important. And up to 20 grams of dietary protein can be ingested before exercise. That might help you build muscle and help with fat burning. And sources of protein can be soy or tofu, beans, nuts, lentils, seeds. Hemp hearts are a good source of protein, but definitely eating pre-exercise will help with your weight loss goals in the long term, especially if you want those weight loss goals to be from fat. Limiting fat sources and making sure they're from whole foods. Fat are very efficient as being stored as fat. So that's why carbohydrates are inefficient if they're full of fiber, and protein is inefficient because it takes calories to break them down. We know that water should be our drink of choice. So if you want to be a better fat burner, you want to eat lots of fiber. Fiber is your friend. You want to make sure that you get enough sleep, that you exercise daily. So I forgot to talk about inactivity as much, but just make sure that you're not sitting for longer than 2 hours. And if you are sitting all day, get up every 30 minutes for 2 minutes, and manage your stress, because that makes it much harder to lose weight. So if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself. When you lose fat cells, do the fat cells go or do they get smaller? So they don't go, they just shrink. We do have a limited number. You really have to overeat to make more, but mostly our fat cells expand if you really have to be quite overweight before you start making more. So that's the good news. So the fat cells just shrink. Your intramuscular fat will definitely be eliminated. So you can get rid of that marbly looking intramuscular fat.